As you know, this year we've been using the Gospel of Mark, yet today the Gospel is from John. And what's interesting is this Gospel, the miracle of the feeding of the multitude, it appears really in all four of the Gospels. It appears twice in Mark, twice in Matthew, once in Luke and John. Now, John's account, we have to realize, was written some 60 years later. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were already around. People were aware of those Gospels. And John was more of a theological writer. And what he was doing was not focusing on the miracle, which he really knew it was a miracle of Christ. It wasn't some kind of a stunt or a sharing of food people carried with them, which they didn't when they came out to hear him. What he was doing was kind of tying up a theology and a focus on Jesus, of who Jesus was and what his mission was. And thus we see he's on a mountain like Moses on Sinai. We see the saying where the barley loaves came from a young boy, 5 loaves, in comparison to the 20 loaves that were given to Elisha that we heard in the first reading. Elisha the prophet fed his hundreds, Jesus fed his thousands. And thus John is linking Jesus to Moses, who led the people out of Egypt to the promised land. He pointed them to the promised land, but Moses never entered the promised land. He points to Elisha, and thus Jesus, like those two, is the prophet, and he is the one to come. And so the people see this and start to proclaim Jesus as the prophet. He is the Messiah, the one to come. He is the King of Israel. And yes, John is saying all that, but at the same time, John is saying that is not his mission. And that is why Jesus withdrew, because Jesus' mission was to lead to a different kingdom. His kingdom was beyond this world, and Jesus was leading there. John was talking, remember, 60 years later, in light of Jesus' death, his resurrection, and his ascension. And he was tying together, trying to bring together the Old Testament, New Testament, and putting it all in place through this one miracle and explaining the theology of Jesus as the King of all creation and the ultimate goal of where all of us were going, to a kingdom where Jesus pointed and was waiting for us to join him.